Hello and welcome back to the Meet the Translator podcast. My name is Dot and today I'll be joined by Alessio Armenise, Andrew Bell and Silvia Romano for an episode on medical translation. I'll be finding out what medical translation consists of, the challenges involved, what skills are needed to be a medical translator and much more. Enjoy! Everybody, welcome to my podcast. It's really lovely to have you all here. Today we've got Silvia, Alessio and Andrew. And today's episode is about medical translation. So do you each want to give a little introduction about yourself, what you do and how you became a medical translator? Alessio, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah. Hi, Dot. Thank you for inviting me. I'm Alessio. I'm an Italian translator, and I translate medical and marketing content. I translate from English, French, and Spanish into Italian, but for medical translations, I only translate from English to Italian.
Okay. Andrew, what about you?
So, hi everyone. I'm Andrew. I translate from Spanish, Portuguese, and Catalan into English. And I mainly work in medical translation. Very occasionally I'll do something else, but mainly medical. I started my career as a translator in September 2020. And before that, I did an MA in translation. So the whole translation journey started in 2019. So that's about 3 years now, just over 3 years.
Okay. Yeah. Silvia, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Hi, Dot. Thank you. I'm Silvia. I'm an Italian translator too. I translate from English, Turkish and Portuguese into Italian, mainly the fields of marketing, medical, automotive and sailing and tea trade and other very small niches.
It's a really interesting mix of different things you've got there.
Yeah, they say you shouldn't mix like hobbies and work. I can only mix those. Like the only way my life works is if I mix the two. So that's why I have this interesting mix.
I mean, definitely sounds interesting. I bet you don't really get bored very easily.
Yeah, definitely.
So I feel like the medical field is like quite a broad field. I feel like there's a lot of different translation that goes on within it probably. I mean, I don't really know a lot about it, to be completely honest. So I thought it'd be interesting to hear you each say what kind of medical text you translate, just to see like the difference between them. So Alessio, what kind of medical text do you translate?
Yeah, as you said, Dot, there are a lot of types of texts you can translate in the medical field. I've translated a lot of marketing materials for medical equipment, for example. I even did transcreations for medical stuff. So, as you said, it can be either a more technical text, clinical trials, scientific research, patient information leaflets, but it can also involve more creative stuff like advertising campaigns, social ads, and so on. It's a variety of types of texts, not just the more technical one that one might think that are more common, but actually medical translation means a lot of things, not just the more technical stuff.
Mm-hmm. I do find actually doing these podcast episodes on different specializations, a lot of them actually do overlap, and because I'm planning a future episode about marketing translation on its own, but like, you know, marketing translation can be medical translation, which also can probably be like loads of other different kinds of translation, I guess. So what about you, Silvia? What kind of text do you mainly translate?
Yeah, just like Alessio, I also do a lot of marketing, also packaging, for example, which is another interesting type of text for me. I've also done some leaflets, both patient-facing and like doctor or healthcare practitioner-facing documents. So, and also it's quite difficult to define like medical translation. For example, with Silvia Martinelli, which you may have seen on LinkedIn, we interact quite a lot. we translated a leaflet on autism and bilingualism in children. So it's not medical. I don't know. It's quite complex, and that was a very interesting project. I've also done some information materials on like new drugs for nurses and doctors. I've also translated parts of a manual of use for deep TMS, which is transcranial magnetic stimulation machine, which is used to treat depression and other conditions. And that manual was like such a mixture of different types of text. You had very technical materials on the functioning of the machine, so there was like physics and mathematics, also chemistry. You also had questionnaires for the patients, also, instructions for the actual for the actual doctors and practitioners who were going to use the machine, informational materials for the patients. It was really a variety. There was also legal parts that you needed to translate. So, for example, I don't do legal, so that's one part I'm not really confident in. But sometimes you get the whole project, you cannot say, okay, this is fine, this is not. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I've done both more technical and marketing texts.
It's interesting as well having like such a mix of different things within one project. Like, I guess it keeps it interesting again, doesn't it?
Yeah. Also, during my master's, I like one of my specialisms was technology. So, like medical equipment is very close to that, and it's quite interesting. I also do market research for medical equipment.
Okay, interesting. What about you, Andrew?
So I don't do anything creative, so I'm going to be the stereotypical medical translator here. So I mainly do, it's 50-50 for me. 50% is medical journal articles, which are usually doctors writing about their experiences with patients, with diseases, and how they treated the patient, which is really interesting because you never do the same subject twice. And even if you do the same subject, it's from a different angle, a different experience. So it's always something new. And then the other 50% is mainly clinical trial documentation. So that's like really broad in itself, but my niche within that is mainly adverse event reports, which is when something goes wrong in a clinical trial and they have to do a report about what reaction occurred when this patient took the drug. Also communication with ethics committees. So they're kind of linked in a way. So when people organise a clinical trial, they need to get permission from an ethics committee, which basically says that the clinical trial is ethical, they're not taking advantage of people, that it's safe. So that's quite a common document to do as well. And then the other things that come along once every few months would be like a medical report. I was told, although it's not happened to me, that you do get a lot of medical reports in like autumn because people will go to Spain and like fall over and break their leg. And then they need to get their reports translated from Spanish to English so they can continue treatment. They can continue treatment in the UK when they come home. But that's not actually happened to me, but a few people have said that to me. And then I've had a couple of autopsy reports as well, which sounds quite like grim, but it's not actually that bad. It's very methodical the way it's written. So they just tell you how much each organ weighs, which I suppose if you don't like that kind of stuff, it's probably a bit like nauseous to hear about it. But I actually quite enjoy doing that, but I've only done about 2 or 3 of them. Apart from that, it'll be like the random general text you get every now and then.
I didn't even know that, like, I would have had no idea what's even in, like, an autopsy report or, like, any of these things. Like, it does sound interesting, but I'm not sure that I could personally do that. I think I would struggle. Other than, I guess, I was going to ask what are the challenges that come with translating it, other than, like, obviously getting past the bits that might make you a bit squeamish. Like, what would you say are the, like, biggest difficulties and challenges when translating medical content? Anyone?
I can go. I think the most difficult thing is looking for terminology. I mean, usually there is as for all technical texts, there's a correspondence 1-to-1. So for one word, a specific word in English, there is one in Italian. So usually, even if you want to do a quick research, you can go on Wikipedia, just switch the languages and see very quickly. But of course, the thing I usually do is, apart from the glossaries, official ones for Italian medical terms that you find online, I read a lot of articles on the specific topic. So as more articles you read, the more you get the idea of what you're going to translate and the words that you're going to choose. So I think that's the most difficult thing in general. But specifically for the combination English to Italian, I'd say register is very challenging, because English is generally more simple compared to Italian. Italian uses a very high register for medical content, even if it's just for advertising or social ads. I mean, it's not as high as for clinical trials, but still, the general public uses a more specific terminology for medical stuff. So there's this switch between English and Italian for the register. You need to go to a higher level of register. So yeah, that's it for me.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting, actually.
I would also add that for me, one of the main challenges is actually knowing when leaving something in English is okay, because this happens a lot, especially with new drugs, new names, new procedures. Very often they are left in English, like their names or acronyms, and it's sometimes your first instinct is to translate it, and then you discover that everything is left in English, even in Italian, like even in the most Italian publication you can find. That's quite challenging, sometimes even annoying, because maybe you just spent like 10 minutes researching it and coming up with an excellent translation, and you find out you could just leave it in English. And for me personally, it's also quite sad, because I see the other side of the issue, with my parents being both doctors and my boyfriend also, almost. My parents, who are from an older generation, they often complain about the preponderance of English, like everything is in English. Maybe a text is actually in Italian, but the amount of English words that you find in it makes it incomprehensible to someone who's specialized in that discipline, but simply doesn't know English. So I usually try to stay within the limits that I see online. Like, if something is in English, I will not push an Italian translation on it. But I like to make sure that something if something can be translated, I try to.
Because I would have thought as well, I mean, I don't really know, but I feel like, isn't there a lot of like Latin as well in medical stuff?
Yeah,
like
that's the easy part, I think.
Did you?
Like Latin and Greek are the easy part, because they're almost identical in Italian. Sometimes words are organized differently, so maybe like one suffix or prefix attaches to a different word. I don't know how to explain this, but sometimes it's different, but the core of the word is the same. So if there is a Latin or Greek origin word, I thank all the gods, actually, because that's easy. Like 99% of the time, Italian is the same. So you just Italianize it, and it's fine.
It's quite good, actually, then, isn't it? So coming back to what Alessio was saying about the challenge with the terminology, and I've seen you've done some like Instagram posts where you have like different terminology, or like explain different kind of medical things on Instagram. How do you make sure that you're always using the like correct terminology? Because I imagine that's probably quite important.
In an ideal world, the client will give you a glossary and you can just follow the glossary. But I'm not sure in the case of Alessio and Silvia, but that rarely happens. Maybe like 1 in 100 times they'll give you a glossary, or they'll give you a glossary that just doesn't have the terms you need. So you really need to rely on your research skills. I found that Wikipedia is good to get a general idea. So because it's usually bilingual and in a lot of languages, but I never trust Wikipedia because anyone can put information on there. So I think that's a good place to start to get an idea, and then that can help inform your research. And then what I personally try to do is trying to find the term used in a reputable journal or used on a well-known medical website. And if I can find it, then I will use it. And sometimes you'll find that maybe the term just doesn't exist. Usually in English, that's not the case, because usually, like Sylvia was saying, people tend to just leave things in English. But sometimes you do just have to try and describe it, or in the worst case scenario, you just need to say to the client, look, I don't know what this term means, can you help me? And I've had some times where they've come back and said, no, even the client doesn't know what that means. And it just might be like a typo or something. So you've spent all this time researching a term that doesn't even exist. But it all boils down to how good you can, how well you can research terms. And that's just something that comes with practice. The more you do it, the better you get. And you know where you should be looking.
For Italian, I think one of the best ways to find terminology and to get a better understanding of what you're translating is also the university's research. So university usually publish a lot of articles, and you can have a look at them. And usually they're easier to understand for me compared to, of course, journals are usually written in English. So for the Italian terminology, you look on university research. So for me, that's very helpful.
Do you ever find yourself being the person that comes up with the new term in your target language, or would you never do that? Because surely at some point, something does need to be translated, and there needs to be a term.
I don't think I would feel confident enough to do that. No, I mean, not now, at this stage of my career. It's just been 2 years, so I don't feel confident enough to invent a new term. Usually I work with translation agencies. Some of them are specialized in medical translation. So they just give you a glossary, and so they exist. Some exist, and they give you a good glossary. Especially with one translation agency, they give me usually the whole terms that need to be added to the text, and that's too easy sometimes. But it happened to me that they gave me the whole thing, and maybe if it's a client they've had for a long time, they translated a lot of stuff for them for their website, for example. They already have all in their term bases, and you can even look on their website that's already been translated into Italian. So,
I mean, I guess you'd probably, if you did actually need to come up with the new term yourself, you'd probably have to check with the client and everything and make sure they were happy for you to do that.
I think it should be approved, officially by some institutions. So, yeah.
I don't know how these things work.
Yeah, and personally, I feel that the tendency towards leaving everything in English is especially strong when it comes to new terms. So it's happened to me that sometimes something could have been translated into Italian quite naturally, it didn't need too much alteration or sounding natural, but the guideline was leave every new word in English. If it doesn't have an approved official translation, just leave it in English. And I don't know, it's a pity sometimes, because I always feel that it hinders the comprehension of people who don't necessarily like know English to such an extent.
Yeah.
Maybe for advertising campaigns, you can try to translate things because they're for a more general audience. So you can try to make the language as easy as possible, especially for social ads. Because then one of my clients told me, no, it needs to be very easy, especially the social media posts. They have to be very quick, immediate for everyone. So there, maybe you can dare to translate and shouldn't leave it in English. So for a marketing purpose, yes.
If it's something that's going out to the general public, you're probably not translating a brand new word that's only like for something that's only just been discovered. So I guess you're probably less likely to come across it in that situation, maybe.
Yeah,
you're right.
Yeah, and about this, I was going to say that for this specific reason, Facebook groups are like excellent. I'm part of some groups for personal reasons, because I have a chronic illness. So I'm like in those groups just to learn more and see what other people are doing. But sometimes they are like a huge resource for terminology, or maybe just to see how common people are calling things. So if you need to talk to like common people and not professionals, it may be a good option. Maybe don't copy like the grammar mistakes and the wrong terms, but that's great for me. And it works for many other marketing texts, I mean, in many areas, so not just medical.
Yeah, I mean, English words are not only used for new things. Some of them just are now in the Italian vocabulary. So maybe in that sense, maybe translating them for a marketing purpose could make sense, because English now, especially in Italian in general, not only in the medical area, it's very common. It's very common to see English words. So maybe some clients just avoid using English words for this kind of texts. So, but yes, as Silvia said, English is the English terms are used for new things more often.
So do you need to have some kind of medical degree to be able to be a medical translator, or like do you need specific training? Or
I would say no, but it certainly helps.
Mm-hmm. Have any of you got like a medical degree, or have you what kind of training did you do before translating medical texts?
Actually, I know some people do a chemistry or a biology degree when they want to translate medical content. But for example, from my experience, during my bachelor's, the last year of my bachelor's, during the 2 years of my master's, I translated mainly scientific and medical texts. So I did. I mean, it wasn't a master's in medical translation, but for English to Italian, for the translation, specialized translation course, we did mainly medical stuff and scientific research. So as we focused on that area, I felt confident enough to start translating for agencies. I did translation tests for some agencies, and then they were fine. So I started working with them. I mean, at first, they will give you proofreading tasks so that you can see how they work and how their texts are usually translated, because every client wants it done a different way. But then they start giving you translation tasks. So even if you don't have a medical degree, but you did a lot of medical translations during your studies, I think that's a good background to start with.
Because I guess you need to have a certain level of knowledge or like experience in it before you start actually translating official texts and things, because I mean, I'd imagine that it's like the kind of field where it could be quite dangerous if someone just translates a medical text that doesn't really know like the specialization yet, because if you get something wrong, it could have a detrimental effect to somebody. What do you do to make sure that you've got enough experience and knowledge in it before you start actually translating the text to make sure that you're not making any errors?
I think also CPD, you have to do CPD. So, for example, I bought this book about medical translation, which is a sort of Bible. It's called Medical Translation Step by Step, Learning by Drafting. And it's one of the first things I did before starting. Then there are also online courses. For example, for Italian translators, there is STL, Formazione per traduttori, which is translators training. So they have a good medical translation course. But I think that if you work with translation agencies, there will be a translator, a proofreader, then the translation agencies will have a final look at your translation. So of course you're not alone with the direct client. So at first I suggest working with agencies, because there's always a proofreader, and if you get something wrong, there's someone that will fix it. So yeah, that's basically it.
Mm-hmm. Do you find that you get a lot of feedback then, especially when you're starting out?
I found very useful the feedback I got after the translation tests. I passed a few of them, and then they sent me the feedback, even if I passed it, but they said, okay, it's better to do this way, because everyone also has different preferences. Like every agency, they will prefer one thing over the other, so they will give you feedback. And at the beginning, all the translation tests I did were very, very useful, because they gave me a better understanding of medical translations at a professional level. So it was even a higher degree compared to what I did during my master's. So yeah, that was very helpful.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Andrew or Silvia, do you have anything to add to this?
I would agree with what Alessio said. CPD is really important if you want to specialize as a medical translator. So you don't need any kind of formal qualification, but you do need to be really interested in medicine or anatomy, whatever it is you want to specialize within medical translation, and you need to be willing to do a lot of CPD when you first start out if you don't have a formal background or education in some kind of medical field. When I started out, I was similar to Alessio. I did a medical translation course, but I did mine with training for translators, and that was like a crash course in medicine, and that was really helpful. And from there I had the same book as well, this medical translation step by step, and there was one part that I thought was really helpful to help with like imposter syndrome and things like that, I don't remember exactly what it said, but it was something along the lines of a medical translator needs to understand heart surgery, but they don't actually need to do it. So you don't need to be a doctor to be a medical translator. You just need to understand the process. So you have the same knowledge, but at a different level, if that makes sense. You don't need to use the knowledge to do something. You just need to describe it, which is easier than actually doing it. So that's also something useful to remember.
Yeah, and
that makes
I would also add that the ability to research words, as Andrew was saying before, I think it's the most important part, that you need to be able to look for things and find the correct translation for a term, and also find maybe you need to understand something just in the moment to be able to translate it correctly. It doesn't mean that you need to know how heart surgery works in general, like all types of heart surgery. Maybe, of course, you need to know a bit about the structure of a heart, how the blood gets in and out. But you don't need to know everything in detail. You can just learn about it on the spot when you need to translate it from other sources, of course, not from the text you're translating. and then apply that knowledge to make sure that you're translating it correctly. Like it happened to me a few days ago. It was a market research on, I don't remember exactly because I've done several ones that were quite similar to one another, but they were all of new medicines, and one of those had a mistake in the name in English in the source language. And while researching the most appropriate translation for that term, I found out that they had added an extra like anti-something, and that was an extra because the word itself already conveyed the message. So it was like something that went against something that went against something else, and it didn't make sense both in English and in Italian. So that was really useful to correct the source text, which is not something that happens very often to me. Like I don't find that many mistakes in source text, but when it happens, it's nice even to point it out to the client. It makes you look good.
Of course, a good thing is to have between your friends at least a friend that studies medicine or does chemistry or biology. I have like a friend that is graduated in chemistry, and every time I have some doubts, I just ask him. Or I have a friend, my flatmate from my master's, he's studying medicine, and like the first medical translations I did, I asked him to read them first before I sent them to my clients. So in general, for every area of translation, it's good to have friends that specialize in that area, so you can always ask them if you have doubts.
Yeah, don't be alone.
That's a good point. I've actually been doing that. Like lately, I've been doing quite a bit of like football content subtitling, which isn't my specialism, but like the kind of stuff I've been doing, like I've been doing it all right. But luckily, like my boyfriend plays a lot of football and he knows all about football. So every time I'm like what? Like I'll like show him a diagram of the thing that they're talking about in German and be like, what, like, what is going on in this diagram? What do you call this in English? Like, so like, I think that's probably helpful for like anything that anyone is translating.
Yeah, sometimes when I receive a medical translation, I tell my boyfriend, we have a new translation like to do, because he helps me out so much. Like he's the main reason why I'm kind of successful, I think, at this. So yeah, a great deal of the merit is his, because he's like, he knows everything because he's just finished studying now. So everything is quite fresh, it's quite up to date. So it's very, very useful. But actually I found that medical like professionals, usually they're not as precise with terminology as we tend to think. Like every time I ask my parents or my boyfriend, how do you say that? He gives me at least 3 different versions of something. And he says, like, yeah,
True.
you can use that interchangeably. It doesn't change anything. So mainly I just use him to make sure that the translation is formally correct. Like nothing is completely wrong and that it's not clunky. Like it sounds medical in style and in form and register, as Alessio was saying before also.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so one thing that we've kind of touched on as well is like I feel like medical translation is maybe a bit more high risk like than other kinds of translation, at least compared to what I'm doing, like when I'm subtitling movies and stuff. Like if I get something wrong, then it might not have as big of an impact as if you were to get something wrong with a medical translation. So like because of that, do you need like extra insurance to cover that or anything? Andrew, I think you've got some extra insurance, right?
Yeah, so I have professional indemnity insurance. It's not compulsory to have an extra insurance if you want to be a medical translator, but I think it is a good idea just to have that extra cover just in case. It's kind of like when you get car insurance. I know it's not quite the same because you have to get it by law, but you don't get car insurance thinking, oh, I'm going to have a crash next week. It's the same with medical translation. You don't get the insurance because you think, oh, I can't do this. But like you said, things could go wrong. I think it depends as well what kind of area of medical translation you work in. So with clinical trials, that's quite a high risk area. But because of that, I found that the clients tend to have a lot of QA processes. So it's not you do the translation, it'll be proofread, it'll be revised bilingually. It will go through so many stages that by the end, it's almost impossible that there will be a mistake in the translation. But I think it's worth remembering that it is a high-risk area. So that's why quality insurance is so important.
Mm-hmm. Is that something that any of you do as well? Like, do you offer like QA as well as translation, or do you all just do the translation?
I do. Actually, a lot of my work is QA editing and post-editing. I think it's even more than actual translating at the moment. I've never done QA in medical translation, actually. I usually do it for other fields. But yeah, I do editing and revision, both bilingual and monolingual.
Okay. We've talked, I think all of you have mentioned that you work with agencies. Do you just work with agencies? Are there lots of agencies that specialise in medical translation? Or do you also work with direct clients?
There are a few medical translation agencies. I found a few of them from the UK, so they asked me to translate from English into Italian. So I worked with British medical translation agencies, but there are also general translation agencies that ask me to do medical translations. Especially one of them asked me to do the medical marketing translations. But no, for me, I've never worked with direct clients, and I wouldn't do it for now. Or maybe I would look for another medical translator that could help me with the proofreading stage. So yeah,
that makes sense. What about Andrew, Silvia?
I would say in medical translation, for example, in a clinical trial. So when I first started working as a medical translator, I did a lot of work on COVID-19, and it was in the middle of the pandemic. But for that particular project or similar projects, they needed the information in as many languages as possible. So I don't think it would make sense for them to work for a direct client to contact you for that, because you can only offer a limited number of languages. It makes more sense for the pharmaceutical company to contact one or two agencies who can then translate that into 50 plus languages. So I think depending on the scope of the project, you're probably not going to get that kind of work from a direct client. Personally, I don't have any direct clients for medical translation. All my direct clients have been for things like birth certificates, or I was once asked to transcribe an interview for the Homeless World Cup, which was really interesting, but it was not related to medical translation at all. So I'm sure there are direct clients in medical translation, but I think if you work in clinical trials, you're probably not going to find that many. So it's quite a tricky one maybe to get established with a direct client base. Especially when you're starting out, it would be much easier just to approach agencies.
That makes sense.
I feel the same also with marketing and medical translation. It's very rare that maybe a client wants to start marketing their product in a country, and they can provide texts for just one translation and they have so few texts that just one translator can translate them, and only into one language. I think it's quite rare. I mean, if you want to launch a new drug, a new product, a new piece of equipment, a new machine, you need to, usually it's quite a big thing, so you won't just ask one person to translate it all. I think it would be so much material, and so such a variety of texts and languages that it wouldn't make sense to hire translators individually. Mm-hmm. Maybe with patient reports, I've done I've translated a report from Turkish into Italian, and what it also included like prescriptions. So that was kind of one-off. I mean, it only happened once, and the client only needed it once, but it was still through an agency. Like, they didn't ask me directly to do it. Maybe, I don't know, maybe because the agency, they can handle things more smoothly. They can like ensure that you have the translation, editing, maybe QA step all in order, and they will have the translator for sure. They will have one person who can take care of that language pair, I think.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. No, yeah, that makes sense. So you've all said that you also have other areas of specializations that you do as well. How does medical translation compare to other kinds of translation in terms of like rates? Are you able to charge more because it's more technical and sensitive, or does it not really vary that much?
I would say yes, you can charge more. It's one of those tricky ones because translators don't talk about their rates, so you don't really know if you're charging more or not. But when I was at the ITI conference this year, a few people did ask me about rates. And in general, the people who were generalists were having a lower average per word rate than the medical translators. From the people I spoke to, we were charging about 2p more per word, which, again, unless you speak to people, you don't realize that. But after that conference, I was like, wow, actually, if you specialize, you can earn a little bit more money, especially if you specialize from the beginning of your career. That means you don't have to be part of these like translation horror stories where you're translating something that's for like $0.01 per word. So it certainly is worth your while. It certainly is worth your while specializing if you can and if you want to.
I guess there's also quite a lot of money in like pharmaceuticals and that kind of thing, isn't there? So I'd think maybe that they would be able to pay more. I know it goes through agencies, but still, like, because when you say specialising, I know that maybe specialising in like literary translation, for example, I don't know exactly, but I'd imagine that there's probably more money in medical companies that are paying for the translations compared to like maybe authors and stuff. I don't know if that has an impact on it. I'm just sort of like guessing things now.
Yeah, as you said, Dot, it goes through translation agencies. So of course you can't ask a lot more to a translation agency because they generally ask your rate. So you say just one rate, and I mean, at least for me, it's always that rate for marketing and medical. I don't know if they would be willing to pay you more. I mean, once it happened to me that I asked a certain rate to a very small translation agency, and the agency told me, no, I want to pay you more. So they paid me like 3 cents more per word. And I think I also shared this info on the translators group we have. It was like 1 year ago. And I was so surprised. I said, oh, really? I never heard so much money for a translation. And she was honest. So maybe, yeah, as you said, the budget was higher because this agency worked with a medical equipment company, and they wanted to market this their product in Italy. So yes, it can happen, but usually if you work with agencies, they only want one rate and you have to stick to it. Of course, if it's a new client, I will never negotiate my translation rate for medical content. I might negotiate it if it's a more general text, I don't know, for marketing stuff. But for medical, I won't negotiate because it takes me more time to do all the research, to read all the articles, to look for the terminology. So I wouldn't say for me that I charge a lot more, but I'm less willing to negotiate my rate if it's medical because you have to put a lot of effort into it, a lot of research.
Yeah, I agree, and I also agree on the specialization thing. I'm having a lot of fun specializing, like really narrowing it down lately. So when an agency asks me about a specific field, a service that I offer, I usually provide them with a list of topics that I've translated and text, and I think that, they told me that it looks quite impressive when you can provide precise information on specific jobs that you've done in the past. So, and that helps giving a better impression and being able to negotiate rates, like higher rates. But yeah, and with some clients, I would say that our hourly rates are, with some clients, I would say that hourly rates are also great, because in that case they do pay you for how long it takes you. So it doesn't matter that it's taking you 1 hour to research one sentence, it's fine, because that's the rate. But yeah, I'd say that in general, specializing in niche fields that are quite technical will make you able to, will give you the possibility to negotiate higher rates. I see that with automotive too. I translate a lot of content for tractors and outboard engines and cars, electric vehicles, all that kind of stuff. And that really, it's an advantage point when you can say, I've translated this, and that, and I can do it. And I've actually done, 100,000 words in that field. And the same goes for medical. Mm-hmm. It's quite useful to be able also to give a precise figure of what you've accomplished to this point.
I've never thought to actually track how many
I don't track. I just give an estimate, because I do a lot of post editing. So sometimes you get 30,000 words in a week, and that's quite a lot if you need to translate them from scratch. But for post editing, I don't know, it's actually fine, at least for me. So, and of course, there are also matches. So sometimes there are lots of 100% matches and context matches. So you don't post edit everything too. So I haven't found a way to actually calculate how many words I've translated so far, because it's so confusing. There are so many variables.
Yeah, I think I would. Well, most of my work is subtitling, so I can't. I'm not writing down the number of words. But I guess, yeah, that might be tricky. So for anyone who's listening who is thinking that they want to become a medical translator, and specialise in the field, can you each give one piece of advice for those people who are listening?
Yeah, my advice is to pick something that really interests you. In my case, it was quite easy. As Andrew said, especially if you start with a specialization right off when you start out, it's quite easy to avoid feeling anxious and having that tension about rates, about imposter syndrome and all that. In my case, it was picking specializations that I was already comfortable in, which specifically came with the fact that I have this chronic illness called uveitis, which affects the eyes. I was also diagnosed with carcinoma, which is a type of cancer. So, of course, this is not fun, but they gave me the opportunity to learn a lot about several aspects of the human body and procedures and drugs and everything that you might need to become a medical translator. And also, my upbringing also helped in that. Having all these doctors around me all the time was quite beneficial, but of course you cannot control that. So if you can, maybe pick something that really stimulates you to learn more about that. It can be something that affects you directly, someone you love, or just something that piques your interest, really. It doesn't have to be an illness that you have, but of course, if it's something you can relate to, or at least have a really deep interest in, I think it's way better than just picking something randomly just because you think that cardiology has a lot of money in it, for example. It does if you really can specialize and be a valuable professional. But if you can't, you're just left with a specialization that you don't like and you're not motivated to pursue, and it will affect your work probably. So yeah, that, and try to read as much as possible to gather information. If you like the subject, it will be easier, not easy, but maybe easier to watch. Even YouTube videos sometimes are quite resourceful, like they are full of information. And also I like to gather information at different levels. So I like to listen to doctors and healthcare professionals of various, like they have various tasks in a structure. And I also like to listen to people who are patients and who have certain pathologies and they talk about it. So you kind of learn from well-rounded perspective. It's not monodimensional.
Good advice there. Alessio, do you have any piece of advice you'd like to share?
So I would say, as I said before, a lot of CPD when you start out, but also while you're working as a medical translator. So never stop reading stuff related to what you translate. So I suggest to not have imposter syndrome, because if you, for example, translated medical content for a while at uni, or you've already worked with some agencies, or you even did just 10 tests and you got the feedback, it's fine. You can start working with them, because when you work with agencies, they help you with feedback. They help you, with their process. As I said before, they start from the proofreading tasks and then they go to the translation tasks. So they follow you in a certain sense. They help you. So I would say, no imposter syndrome, and you can start working as a medical translator with them. What else? I think we covered a lot during this this episode, so I don't think there's a lot to add. But yeah.
Andrew, did you have a final piece of advice for everyone listening?
I think Silvia and Alessio have covered more or less everything. Just my little bit to add to this would be join a professional organisation as well. So I'm a member of the ITI and also of the ITI Medical and Pharmaceutical Network. And just being part of a group of other translators that specialise in the same thing as you is really helpful. So the medical network has their own forum for members where you can ask questions, and you don't feel like what am I trying to say? And you can ask questions and you don't feel like you're putting yourself out to the wolves, like I've seen on some public forums, where someone will ask a very genuine question and people will tear them to shreds, and it's and then they probably feel like they'll never ask a question ever again. So it's nice to have that kind of network where you can ask and you can be confident and people aren't going to judge you, because and it also helps as well. You see people with 20 years experience asking questions and you're like, oh, well, it's not because I'm new, it's genuinely because it is a difficult field, and that can help with the imposter syndrome that Alessio was saying as well.
Yeah, at any stage in your career, you're still not going to know everything at any point. So that's some good advice, everybody. Thank you. So yeah, if anyone listening has any more questions, I don't know what else they could ask, but if anyone has any more questions for any of you, or wants to get in touch, what's the best way to do that? Where can they find you online, Silvia?
I think the best way is through my LinkedIn profile, which is my name is Silvia Romano, translator, and you can find me that way. Or my email address, which you can also find on my LinkedIn profile, but it's translation@romanosilvia.com. my LinkedIn profile is quite neglected at the moment, but I swear I try to reply to messages at least. So, and I'm always very happy to reply to any questions or like requests.
Okay. Alessio, how can people contact you?
Yeah, LinkedIn and Instagram. Now I also have an Instagram business page that I take care about, not only LinkedIn. So it's quicker than LinkedIn. I mean, so you can reach out to me on LinkedIn to Alessio Armenise, which is my name and surname, or on my IG business page, which is Armenise Translation. Usually, people that are starting out, they contact me on Instagram more than LinkedIn. So LinkedIn and email is more for work, potential clients, whereas I connect with colleagues on Instagram now.
Okay. Yeah. What about you, Andrew?
For me, probably LinkedIn. I'm currently in the process of updating my website, so I'm changing some of my handles on Twitter and Instagram. So if you find me on LinkedIn, that'll have all the up-to-date information. It'll have my website if you want to find me on Instagram, Twitter, or by email as well, which will be on my LinkedIn profile as well.
Okay, perfect. I'll make sure to put all of that information in the show notes so that it's super easy for anyone listening just to click on it. And I'm also going to put the book you mentioned, the book that you both, Alessio and Andrew, mentioned, and some of the other resources. When I listen back through this, I'll add them in the show notes so it's easy for people to just find those. But yeah, thank you so much for joining me on my podcast. It's been really interesting. I've certainly learned a lot today from you all. So thanks.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you, Dot.
Thanks for listening to this medical translation episode of the Meet the Translator podcast. I hope you found it as interesting as I have. Thank you to Alessio, Andrew and Silvia for joining me and sharing so many insights. Check out the show notes for links to get in touch with my guests and for useful resources from this episode. And if you have any questions or comments about the podcast in general, send an email to meetthetranslator@gmail.com.